everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for our memorial for our dear friend and colleague, Peter Gerhart. I want to let you know that we have a number of Peter's family members who are joining us, including Ann T. Gerhart, Mary and James Gerhart Gross, Matthew Gerhart, Margaret Gerhart, Gracie Gerhart, Bruce and Valerie Gerhart, Anne and Larry Larison, Andrew and Peggy Gerhart, and Jane Tarbutton Evans. You may, if you'd like, put comments into the chat function during the memorial, which will be seen by everybody who is on the call. We will also maintain a transcript of them, which we will share with the family. We will show the slideshow again at the end for those of you who've missed any piece of it or want to see any of the photos again. I struggled to think about what to say, what words to use for a situation like this. And I thought a bit about one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou, that people won't remember what you said, but will remember how you made them feel. I found out on Tuesday of this week that Peter was nominated for the Dean Patterson Jr., quote, "People Are the Most Important Award." It's an award given to a staff, faculty, or alumnus of CWRU has consistently made others feel that they are so important. The nominee should make students feel valued, affirms the student sense of belonging, and treats students with respect. Peter is the perfect candidate for this award, but he did make people feel like this for more than students. He did the same for staff and faculty. And the comments you will hear during this memorial will give you a small taste of who he was and the impact he had on so many people. I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Melvin Derschlag. He's Professor Emeritus of Law and former Associate Dean for Academic Affairs.
I guess I'm okay. I guess I'm on. As the first speaker, I'm going to exercise a prerogative to thank Jessica and Michael, and of course John Enton and everybody else who helped plan this tribute to Peter. It's just one more thing that makes this school such a special place. I first met Peter in the coffee shop of a Holiday Inn, as I recall, just off Interstate 71, north of Columbus. It was, as I recall, the fall of 1985. He was the academic dean at Ohio State Law School, and I was the chair of our dean search committee. Peter insisted on meeting at this kind of out of the way place because he didn't want it known, at least not yet, that he was interested in leaving Ohio State to become the dean at Case Western Reserve. Now that was 35 plus years ago, so I obviously don't remember exactly what we talked about in the several hours that we spent together. What I do remember, however, was his captivating smile and his obvious enthusiasm for accepting a new challenge. I left that meeting pretty much convinced that Peter was going to be our next dean. For reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with Peter, it wasn't an easy road to his faculty vote. That's probably a book in itself. But in the end, it was Peter's charm, and I shall say his scholarship, that won the day. Quite frankly, it was the scholarship that had me a bit concerned, not for any substantive reason, but rather because I knew absolutely nothing about antitrust law, which was Peter's area of expertise at the time. And so I had no independent way of evaluating his scholarship. So I went to Art Austin, who at the time was our antitrust scholar, to ask him to review Peter's work. And Arthur could at times be quite, let us say, demanding. But Peter passed the Austin test with flying colors, and I knew then we had our next dean. And as it turns out, Art was really spot on. I think, as will become evident in a few minutes, Peter has gone on to become a world recognized scholar. Largely because Peter knew me better than anyone else on the faculty, he asked me to be his Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. And with that, Peter started a tradition that lasts to this day, a tradition of having as the dean's right-hand person an academic as well as an administrative dean. He and I became very close during the 3.5 years that I was his associate dean. Time doesn't permit recounting those years when we worked hand in hand to administer the law school. What I will say is that he quite inadvertently saved my career and conceivably my marriage. As the Peter principle would have it, no pun intended, he made me realize that I had reached the highest level of my incompetence. As the Peter principle says, I had reached the highest rung on my administrative ladder. I could never have done for this or any other institution what Peter did for this law school. He worked tirelessly and often into the wee hours of the night, as Anne can attest, raising money, and I would say a lot of money, cajoling alums, and putting out the internal fires that I had neither the authority nor the ability to do. And all that with that captivating smile and calm misdemeanor. I once asked him how he could do what he does. How could he deal with the demands of his office and maintain his upbeat attitude and his calm composure? He told me it was easy. If only you believed in your institution. And Peter believed in Case Western Reserve Law School. Apart from his family, he devoted his life to it, to its students, to his faculty and administrative colleagues. His legacy as dean, teacher, devoted colleague, and personally, above all, as a treasured friend, that legacy lives on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Mel, for those remarks. We're going to turn now to Juliet Kostritsky. She's the McCurdy Professor of Contract Law and the Director of the Center for Business Law.
Thank you, Jessica. We all knew Peter in different ways. Here are some of the ways our students and I remember Peter. Of course, these stories are just a fraction of stories repeated by faculty, students, and staff at the law school. And we are sure at other organizations Peter was involved with. Peter was always reaching out to others, and he will be missed. His kindness to students. Years later, students recall getting emails, which they saved, telling them that they were not defined by their grades. Peter would send this email out to students while they were anxiously awaiting their first semester grades. This email helps students recognize that life continues even if their grades disappoint them, and that learning is a lifelong process. During the pandemic, Peter's classroom was an oasis of kindness and a place for welcome and learning. His students delighted him. He relished answers that were surprising. When studying an epileptic driver case in torts, a student responded with an unusual answer about damages that involves suggesting a hug as a possible remedy. Professor Gerhart, delighted, taken aback, responded, "I had not heard that answer before." His kindness to his peers. Peter recently consoled me at the intensive care waiting room while waiting for my husband to come out of open heart surgery. He somehow managed to find out where I was waiting with my best friend in the hospital. He helped lessen the worry while we were waiting for the outcome. Empathetic and a problem solver. When Case had no maternity leave, policy, and Peter was dean, he made a maternity leave for me possible. I don't know what magic wand he waved, but somehow he made it happen. Insatiable intellectual curiosity. One semester, Peter told me he wanted to enroll in my advanced contracts class as a student. Of course, he soon was co-teaching the class with me. It was so fun playing off different ideas with him. I approached the class from a law and economics perspective, and he from a social morality perspective. The students benefited from hearing us spar. In addition, as another example of his insatiable intellectual curiosity, one summer, Peter and I met with another colleague every week at a Starbucks to discuss incomplete contracts, externalities, and bargaining impediments. At the end of the summer, we had produced a document that encapsulated all of our discussions and helped us in the years to come with our research project. And here's a notebook of the notes from that summer, which I still treasure. Peter and I also wrote an article together, and we had a research assistant. The three of us would meet weekly in the faculty lounge. Peter would come prepared with infectious enthusiasm to share his take on the case. It was an ideal learning environment. We discussed the cases and applied our theories to see if they worked. It was my ideal of how law school should work. Teaching. Peter held office hours when few students came. A student went to see Peter, unsure of the class, but did not have a specific question in mind. Peter was able to draw the student out and have him formulate the unknown questions, leading to a clearer understanding of the class. Another student mentioned how even if you were confused, Peter didn't make you feel bad about your lack of understanding. Instead, he helped you gain better understanding of the material. Sense of adventure. Peter tried to make a boring situation fun. My husband remembers running into Peter while they were both on jury downtown at the Justice Center. At their lunch break, Peter said, "Let's go over to the casino," something my husband would have no interest in doing. With Peter's almost naive sense of curiosity, they played the slots, and my husband ended up winning his lunch money. Peter's enthusiasm brought a sense of joy to this event and to so many others. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you for making me smile with the stories and thinking about some of those memories. We're going to turn now to Andy Dorchak, who's the head of reference at our law library.
On behalf of the law school, library, Joe Custer, the director, and all my colleagues, I extend our sincere condolences to Anne and the rest of the Gerhart family. Several of us had the privilege of seeing Peter smile at us and make a personal connection with us for 30 years, Cliff, Stan, and then I. But he also made a connection with everyone since who has started working with the library, back to the newer people such as Stephanie. I hope you remember happier times and you realize how much of an impact that Peter had on the law school and the law school library. As dean, he helped build the collection, the annex, the addition that let the library have important space to house the collection when it was still important and give the staff space as well. As of the many stories we could talk about how Peter connected with the library staff, my colleague Donna had the best story where her son was studying or living in Prague overseas, and Peter was visiting Prague too, so he took her son out to dinner, even though he had never met him before, and made him feel welcome in another city in Prague. And he dutifully came back home to Cleveland and reported to Donna, the concerned mother, that all was well. Her son had a good head on his shoulders. After stepping down from the deanship, he challenged me personally as his personal librarian liaison while he or with 3 books with Cambridge Press presenting novel, multidisciplinary approaches to contracts, torts, and some other subject. And I guess he appeased Professor Austin by writing a book on antitrust long before I came to the library. So he's an interdisciplinary scholar, but more important than that, during the pandemic, I've heard many stories from Dean Berg and students how he personally helped people, and he personally contacted me by email to encourage me with his cheerful optimism that everything would be okay. So he is a leader and a friend to all of us. My grandmother said when I was growing up that she wanted me to be a gentleman and a scholar, and Peter gave the perfect example of that kind of person, a gentleman, a scholar. So rest in peace, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. We'll hear now from Hugh Dowell. He's a 2019 graduate of the law school and currently law clerk to Justice Patrick DeWine on the Ohio Supreme Court.
Thank you. It's hard to know where to begin when someone like Peter, whose dynamism and joie de vivre was so great, departs from us. So it's best to start from the beginning. The first week of law school, we were sitting in Katie Mercer's legal writing class, and she asked us who was our contracts professor, who was our criminal law professor, and then the last question was, and who's your torts professor? Professor Gerhart, someone replied. Oh, Peter, said Katie, you'll be fine. Everyone loves Peter. This was confirmed in January when Cassandra Robertson said, in our first Civ Pro class, I was reading through the teaching evaluations from last semester to get an idea of your class. And while I don't think you all enjoyed torts, you certainly all enjoyed Professor Gerhart. And in thinking about what to say today, it seems to me it's best to look at why that was so. I think I would be willing to stake a lot on the idea that a law professor can be universally loved by all of those who encounter him. Yes, that was the case with Peter. Certainly his humor and his collegiality made his classroom a joy. I think there's a whole generation of case law students who now can't help think of tortfeasors but as perverts. But it was also small things like beginning emails with dear colleagues and introducing himself when he cold called you. Mr. Dowell, hi, I'm Peter. Certainly as well was his brilliance. But as several people have already said, it was a brilliance that came out of this natural curiosity. And it gave him a vulnerability and a humility as a teacher and as a scholar that was second to none. And it made his classroom a place in which every voice could be heard, was welcomed, was valued, was esteemed, was challenged, was respected. He had a passion for everything he taught and how he taught it. And his desire was to share that passion. But when he asked for criticism, when he asked for comments, when he asked, does this make sense? As he worked out his tort methodology with us, he really wanted to know. And that built up a level of trust that, speaking for myself, and I think for many of his students, brought about the personal relationship that I remember beyond the classroom. Law school is full of moments of doubt and of distress, and it seemed like a semesterly occurrence that I would email Peter and we would grab coffee, and I would lay out the latest crisis in my legal career before him. And he would talk me back from the ledge, discuss ways of moving forward, and help me see the path and the next steps. I know several people who talked about whenever you encountered him, whether it was in the coffee shop, at the gym, in the hallway, when he asked, how are you? And gave you that penetrating, singular stare, you knew it was real. And it made a wonderful space in which to share how you were feeling. As Professor Kostritsky said, he was always great at reminding his students that their value was not their marks. And the story I remember, and that seems quintessentially Peter, is our last day of torts, in which he did say, you aren't your marks. Your career at the bar is not defined by what you get in my class. But you have so much more to give the profession. And then said sincerely, incredibly, and you have already given so much simply by being here, by engaging in the material, by putting yourself forward and participating. And again, it was credible, it was believable, and it was something that we all trusted. And I think the reason we trusted it is because it was something that he believed about us. We are all so much better for having had Peter in our life, and we are all so much the worse for his sudden passing. And I think why so much of his pastoral care, his intellectual care, his professional care rings as true is because he would say the same about us. We learned from him because he wanted those so desperately to learn from us. It was an absolute honor to know him at the beginning of my legal career. I miss him dearly. Valet, Peter.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Our next speaker is Catherine Van Tassel. She's a 1986 graduate of the law school and currently a visiting professor of law here.
Deans Berg and Scharf, Professor Enton, and the Memorial Committee, thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts with our community in this celebration of Peter Gerhart's life. I represent a large group of people who in just a very short time were all quickly drawn into Peter's inner circle by the powerful magnetic pull of his personality and generosity of spirit. I personally came to know Peter when I joined the faculty as a visitor almost 2 years ago. We had our offices right next to each other. I'm a very visual person, and I quickly came to see Peter's office not just as a corner room on the second floor of a building, but as a lighthouse with a strong beacon of light that ceaselessly swept back and forth over the often stormy, perilous ocean that students must navigate when pursuing a career in the law. How did I come to see Peter's office this way? Peter enjoyed a reputation among the students as always being there to help. His beacon regularly picked up students whose small boats were being tossed by the waves of individual crises, both small and large. Peter would guide these students to a pathway toward a resolution for their concerns with wisdom, encouragement, and a strong dose of laughter. As my door is always open, I could see this steady stream of students who came and went daily, like the constant ebb and flow of the tide. I would regularly see students sitting outside his door with body language that reflected some serious inner struggle, their shoulders so tight that they were drawn up almost to their ears, with faces deeply etched with frown lines and thunderous furrowed brows. Peter would welcome them into his office, and I would hear the slow, low murmur of voices. Very soon, these voices would become louder and lighter, and quickly would become punctuated with bright bursts of laughter. Eventually, the pair would emerge from Peter's office, and the student would invariably be smiling. The storm would have passed, and the sun would be shining again. Over time, and as we became friends, Peter started poking his head in my door after each of these student meetings, and with a twinkle in his eye, give me a thumbs up and a grin before returning to his office with a bounce in his step. Peter's office was almost always open for business, as he regularly met with students in the day, the evenings, and even on weekends, whenever he was needed. What was amazing is that this constant parade of students into his door and out didn't drain him. It energized him and made him excited to return to the office the next day. And students weren't the only group he worked with. He also had a wide sphere of friends and colleagues locally, nationally, and around the world, who he regularly worked with, exchanging and commenting on drafts of articles, books, and presentations. I was amazed to learn just how many people I know from across the country who were in regular correspondence with Peter. I personally was blessed to have had the opportunity to collaborate with Peter on many different projects. I can speak from personal experience when I say that those of us fortunate enough to have worked with him will not forget his always wise counsel, sharp insights, and infectious collegiality. In closing, I want to share that I did ask Peter where he got his energy to help network and collaborate with so many people. He responded with one word: family. Peter talked a lot about his wonderful wife, Anne, and his amazing kids and grandkids. They were the super battery that gave Peter the strength to lend a helping hand to so many. Peter's thoughtful, avuncular, and thoroughly winning personality helped to account for his remarkable abilities as a leader, a practical-minded visionary, and an intellectual light of the first order. Sorry, I'm going to turn off my video for a second here. Like so many who are here today, I feel blessed to have known and learned from Peter. Thank you so much for allowing me to share with you today.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for that incredible imagery in your descriptions of the visual interactions and analogies to the sea and the ship at sea. Our next speaker is Kenneth Ledford. He is an associate professor and chair of history and also associate professor of law.
I too would like to thank Deansburg and Scharf and John Enton for including me today. It means a great deal to me to be able to share some of my remembrances of Peter. I first met Peter Gerhart almost exactly 30 years ago. I checked my calendar. It was early February 1991. I had come to Case Western Reserve to interview for an appointment in the Department of History. And because my research focuses on German legal professionals, leaders in the Department of History, David Van Tassel, David Hammack, Michael Grossberg, had arranged for me to meet with some faculty in the School of Law. I first met with Mel Derschlag, newly liberated from his sentence as academic dean, who at the end of our conversation took me to see Peter in the dean's office for a brief visit. I'll never forget this first encounter with Peter's wry and enigmatic, and to me, inscrutable smile, as I explained to him my enthusiasm for the legal system and legal professionals of the Kingdom of Prussia, a state that ceased to be a monarchy in 1918 and ceased to exist at all in 1947. I left his office wondering whether his smile was one of amusement or bemusement, and it was only later that I learned that it was Peter's customary expression. Once I arrived at CWRU that August, Peter was quick and generous to provide me an adjunct appointment to the law faculty. But my primary experience of Peter through the subsequent 30 years was less through his role as dean and more through his role as friend and colleague. And I want to specifically talk about two aspects of his life today: Peter's role as father and churchman. When Susan and I moved to Cleveland, we quickly decided to affiliate with Fairmount Presbyterian Church in Cleveland Heights, where Susan became friends with Anne, bonding over parenting issues as our children were nearly the same ages. Church committees, adult Christian education, and carpool duties for Peter's Margaret and my Sarah were how I grew to admire Peter beyond his professional and intellectual merits, which others have addressed more ably than I. And I learned that his wry smile, his tucked chin, his open ear, and his questioning curiosity were his approach to everybody he met, a gracious spirit that we all enjoyed and cherished. Peter was above all a doting father. I grew to know him first as father of Mary and Margaret, and also of Matt. And Peter and Anne's commitment to family was unbounded in geography as it was in intensity. Fatherhood and family meant teamwork, and it was Peter who traveled with Matt to China to pursue Gracie's adoption, staying there to complete that side of the legal process and bringing her home so that she could join her sisters in wrapping their father around their little fingers. Peter teamed with Anne to model parental devotion to Mary, Margaret, and Gracie, and to share their joys and sorrows, triumphs and setbacks, and to cherish them always. And Peter often did so in the context of his devotion to church, modeling for his girls commitment to community and institution there. Indeed, Gracie is named for one of Anne and Peter's great friends from Fairmount, a truly gracious and estimable person. Now, one might think that after a successful term as dean of a law school, as a continuation as an active member of that herd of cats known as a law school faculty, and with the satisfaction of scholarship as the alternative, Peter might not devote himself to leadership of an institution as dependent upon the unreliable labor of volunteers as a Presbyterian church. But he did, and with enthusiasm and success. For those of you unfamiliar with Presbyterianism, its sometimes foreboding theology in practice takes second place to a polity that refers every question of human existence other than the salvation of one's immortal soul to the tender mercies of a committee. At the top of the pyramid of congregational committees is the session, consisting of ordained laypeople known as elders. And working alongside the pastor of the church is the clerk of session, an elder whose job is to satisfy this whole descending cascade of opinionated parishioners. Not only did Peter serve successfully as an elder, but also as clerk of session, opening Fairmount to new forms of worship, helping it come to a commitment to diversify the congregation to reflect the changing demography of Cleveland Heights, and always conducting himself with his limitless patience, wry sense of humor, indeed, amusement or bemusement, or both. Presbyterians make a big deal about their theology of stewardship of the gifts that we see given to us from God. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. Peter fulfilled this daunting calling, providing what was required and demanded and more, happily, and with an enigmatic smile, a tucked chin, an inquisitive ear, as scholar and colleague, as friend, and as father and churchman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing that with us. I'm now going to turn it to Sarah Polly, our former Dean of Students and Career Development.
Like Andy, I can speak from the staff perspective. Peter was always friendly and kind. When I saw him in the halls or while heating up my lunch in the faculty lounge, he made a point to say hello and ask how I was doing and to ask questions about the well-being of students and to be so very interested in the answers I gave. He was definitely part of what makes this school feel to so many of us who are staff to be very welcoming and supportive. I can also speak to the student perspective and echo what has already been said tonight. I came to consider Peter de facto student services personnel. He embraced his advisor role when we ran the formal faculty advising program, among other things, offering to help students with skills like note-taking and outlining. I recall 1Ls referring to him as dad and just respecting him deeply as both a professor and as a person. And he provided countless students with individual help, often after the semester in which they were in his class. It was clear he freely gave his time to provide academic and personal support to students who were struggling a bit and needed some extra attention. There are several staff and faculty who quietly support our students in those ways and who help to make the support reach here more broad. His contributions in this regard will be greatly missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Jesse Wynn. He is a 3L student and Professor Gerhart's research assistant.
Thank you. I was lucky to have Professor Gerhart in my life in two ways. First, I learned torts from him beginning in my first semester, and second, I went on to work for Professor Gerhart on several projects as his research and teaching assistant. First, I want to talk about Professor Gerhart from the torts student perspective. In a semester where students are often left feeling overwhelmed, to put it mildly, Professor Gerhart's classroom was a breath of fresh air. I'm not saying that his class was easy. In fact, Professor Gerhart's torts class engaged us in a very difficult and philosophy of law manner. But still, even if we were intimidated by his brilliance, many of us felt at ease because of Professor Gerhart's kindness and his friendship. Fellow student Andy Rumschlag put it well when he told me the other day that Professor Gerhart made us feel like colleagues and co-conspirators. I love this phrase because Professor Gerhart had a novel approach to the law that he outlined in his books and highlighted in his class. And when he taught you this approach, it was as if he was letting us in on a secret about the law. But Professor Gerhart wasn't just teaching you this secret, he was also a deeply thoughtful listener who engaged with his students' thoughts and incorporated those thoughts into his own understanding of torts. That understanding was engaging with torts in a values-based way. We were to understand case outcomes in terms of the party's goals and values by giving each party's interests due weight, whether those interests were physical, emotional, or economic. Ultimately, we learned that the court in a torts case just decides how much we should look out for one another and their values and their well-being when we act. Professor Gerhart lived this theme. One example I want to highlight yet again is that every semester, either around the time that students could expect midterm grades or at finals exam time, Professor Gerhart would send his students a message titled, "You are not your grades." For my class, this included a speech that he gave us, telling us that our grades would have almost no impact on the quality or kind of lawyer that we would come to be. He told us that we work as hard as we do because our clients depend on us, not because we want to be the best in the class. In several discussions I've had with students since Professor Gerhart's passing, these messages always come up. This reminder of our inherent value brought peace and purpose to us. Overall, a consistent theme is that Professor Gerhart cared deeply about our well-being. Students will bring that empathy forward for years to come. Secondly, I knew Professor Gerhart as a colleague, as did fellow students Sophia Bilius, Ken Somarero, Andy Rumschlag, and Patrick Conroy, to name just the few that I know of. I say colleague because that is what he called me when I was his research assistant, even though I was barely 1 year into law school and had no legal experience to speak of. I was certainly a relatively less esteemed colleague than those gathered here today, but despite my shortcomings, Professor Gerhart valued my input in his torts casebook and his forthcoming contracts book. Just as he always found the value in your statement in class, he found merit in our suggestions for his theories. He allowed us to craft entire sections around student perspectives. He also allowed me to fix the number of spaces he would put after periods, which varied between 1 space and 5 spaces. Much more importantly, he made me feel like a valuable contributor to his thinking. That is a feeling I will cherish forever. I am heartbroken to know that no more students will get to learn torts alongside Professor Gerhart. But I feel heartened to know that there are perhaps thousands of us, new lawyers and old, trained to approach the law with not just an analytical mind, but with an empathetic one too. In closing, I want to echo Dean Berg's words. When I talk with fellow students about Professor Gerhart, we say very little about what we remember from his torts class, but we say much about how funny he was, how kind he was, and how good he made us feel. We miss him terribly.
Thank you, Jesse. Our next speaker is Wendy Wagner. She's the Dale Professor of Law at the University of Texas and a former professor of law here at Case Western Reserve.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks to Jessica and Michael and John for putting this together, and also to the panelists for their beautiful remarks. So I've known Peter for nearly 30 years, first as a mentor, and then a colleague and a friend. And I have so much I can say about him and his impact on my life, but I only have a few minutes. So I'm going to focus on the various ways that he was an inspiration and is an inspiration to me. So my very first encounter with Peter was as my dean. I was brand new to academia and he hired me. And I have many stories about his role as dean, but one in particular sticks out that I wanted to share. So among the responsibilities of a new faculty member is to publish. And I was very slow at this. And finally, I cobbled together a draft after several years, and he gently volunteered that he would be happy to read it. Well, I was certain he would not have time. It was a mess anyway. And so I said, sure, go ahead. Well, he did read it. And it's then that I first witnessed what I'll call Peter's superpowers to see the invisible. He read through 100 pages of mess to see the foundation, the crux of the project and of my idea. And he gently said, hey, this is something I think you need to articulate and support. This is central to your project. Now, I did the best I could with it, never living up to his advice. But more importantly, when I left that office, I was in awe because I had spent years on that piece. And he had probably spent a couple hours reading it. And yet he was the one that could see through everything to the very crux of the project. So when he retired as dean, selfishly, I had this great idea. Hey, Peter, why don't we become study buddies? So what we'll do is meet in coffee houses and for lunch, and we'll trade drafts. I'll read yours, you'll read mine. And of course, this was all about trying to get more of his superpowers to see the invisible. We did that for at least 20 years, on and off, sometimes every single week in the summer. And I can assure you that the contributions in this arrangement all ran to me. But I also know that my situation is not unique. There were so many faculty members I know who he helped see the invisible in their own projects to peel away the layers and get to the very crux of it. And his visionary powers to really see through things, I think, also shine in his own work. He saw how incredibly siloed and disconnected legal areas are. And he spent years reading everything: philosophy, institutional analysis, legal theory, to try to understand it. And he came up with a theory called social morality and the law. He began writing that, testing it in torts, and then in property, and then more recently in contracts. And in order to ground truth, this theory and these concepts, he also taught an exhausting load of courses. He taught all these courses plus leg reg on top of it. Now, the work that he did is only now beginning to be appreciated. It's only now coming together, all these different pieces, but already the comments on his work and his books individually, without seeing the larger picture, use words like brilliant and prophetic. And I regrettably am certain that this is just the very beginning of how impactful his work is and how it sets a model for the rest of us to leave our little silos and try to bridge these important areas of law, not only for legal academia, but for our students as well. So beyond his remarkable powers to see the invisible, and this has been touched on, Peter was a passionate person. He was passionate about work. He was passionate about life. He bubbled over with enthusiasm about everything. So one example, we were on the phone in January, and I asked him about his coming semester, and he had a couple of classes he had to teach, and he had all these commitments. And I said, "Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry. It sounds awful." And he said, "Oh no, I love it. I love it. This is what I love to do." And you could see this sort of seize the day enthusiasm in everything he did. He didn't let any opportunity go by. So he went to Cambridge for a year with his family to do research. He was a guest lecturer in South Africa for a period of time. He was the president of Lake Erie College. In his personal life, he rented a trailer during the pandemic to go hike around Utah with his mask on. He flew to Europe to sing in choruses regularly in the summer. Here in the States, I know he did these 5-hour dune hikes in the sun and bike rides 20 or 30 miles by himself. And honestly, that is just a sampling of this man's vigorousness and love of everything. So although this has been covered, I think much better than I can, I do want to add my own tribute to Peter's unforgettable generosity as a person and what I only can call a luminous personality. He was one of the warmest, most compassionate, supportive, other-regarding people I've ever met in my life. So my last memory of Peter, actually the last few minutes we spent together, this is probably the last 15 minutes together we were in person, is behind me, a photo. So we were up in northern Michigan watching the sunset with our families. And he said to Gracie, "Hey, I know you can do a headstand on a paddleboard. Go show us." And so she did. And that's Gracie's silhouette on that paddleboard. And I'll never forget that moment because everyone there, it was like time had stopped. We were in awe, not only of Gracie's ability to pull it off, but of the sky and the color of the water and how everything was so quiet and the moon was coming up. And for me, that moment, that picture of Gracie really encapsulated Peter, standing on his head in the middle of a magnificent lake at sunset and leaving everyone who witnessed it with beautiful memories they'll never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Our next speaker is Brian Adamson. He's a 1990 graduate of the law school and currently the Brennan Professor of Law, Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, and a former Dean of Students a number of years ago.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, Michael, John Enton, for putting together this wonderful memorial, moving memorial. First of all, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family and relatives, friends, community that know Peter and knew Peter. In thinking about what I wanted to try to say here, this phrase kept coming through my mind. It's a biblical phrase, but it has secular meaning. Leave good works. That just kept running through my mind, and it touches upon what Wendy just talked about the works that Peter left, and this notion that what we leave, we will be remembered by. We will be remembered by the good works we leave. And Peter left good works. He left good works in the students that he mentored, that he molded, that he touched, that he guided, that he valued, that he told mattered, even when they didn't think they mattered. He left good works in the institutions that he built, whether it was Lake Erie College but especially Case Western Law School and Ohio State. And I am actually proud to count myself as one of those good works. He has been a similar part of my life and my career, first as a law student at Case Western, then as a professor and dean of students, and then back again full circle as a colleague, as associate dean now for not quite a year. As a student, when I arrived in 1987, Peter was a little over a year into the job as dean. And I remember distinctly the greeting that he gave our class. I remember the care and concern and regard he had for me, as not only as a student, but as a member of the Student Bar Association, as an officer for the Black Law Students Association. We spent hours discussing various initiatives and endeavors that the students were engaged in. And he was always deeply interested in what we were doing and extraordinarily supportive of what we were doing. As a professor, he hired me in the clinic. In 1985, after spending some time after graduation at Squire Patton Boggs, then it was Squire Sanders and Dempsey, and then a year in the prosecutor's office with Cuyahoga County, the clinic, and then Dean Gerhart, Professor Gerhart, was good enough to hire me, and thus started my career as a law professor. And so truly, were it not for Peter Gerhart and his support and his enthusiasm of bringing me back to the law school, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be getting so much joy out of my life that I've received, that I've gotten, were it not for him. And I will be forever indebted and forever grateful to him for hiring me on as a member of the Case Western Reserve University law faculty. And now, as I say, in July, when I came back here and he greeted me amongst so many other people, but he especially greeted me with open arms, that wide smile, and those eyes that just lit up. So wonderful and so inviting and so welcoming. So I'm going to tell two stories. All right. So the first story goes back to when I was a student. And I wish I could say that I lived this story myself, but it was a story that I learned vicariously when Michael Scharf, when I got here, asked me to do a in brief piece on the 50th anniversary of BALSA organization at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. And so I'm talking to past executives of Black Law Students Association. I have a conversation with Sylvester Summers. He was the president of BALSA when I was a first year law student. And I think Sly was a 1988 grad. And he, along with Stephanie Mitchell, who was also an officer of BALSA, wanted to take on this huge and novel and unique undertaking to host a Midwest regional job fair that would be sponsored by BALSA and underwritten by Case Western Reserve School of Law. This is back in 1988. No one at any law school in the nation, probably even the world, had ever tried to do something like this. But Stephanie Mitchell and Sly Summers were intent on making this happen, making BALSA the house in Cleveland and Case Western, the site where this huge job fair would take place, where law students from around the Midwest region, from around the law schools all through the Midwest, would come to Case and to Cleveland, and then all of the potential employers would come to Cleveland and interview Case law students and students from around the region for clerkships, never done before. And we were going to hold it at the Cleveland Clinic Hotel. All these grand ideas. The problem was, BALSA didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, didn't have any money at all. So Sly had to go into Peter's office, Dean, right, to ask him for some money. And so Sly's recalling this story for me when I'm in the course of writing this article. And he set up a meeting with Peter Gerhart and Gerhart was a strong Balsa supporter, and it was going to take $15,000 for Balsa to make a down payment on that hotel to secure that hotel. And he knew it was a huge ask and maybe a bridge too far for Peter. So Sly is in Peter's office, and he posed a question to Peter. And Peter looks back and with that wide smile says, "Sure, I'll do it, sure." And Summers laughed as he recalled the caveat that Peter added to that "sure." And Gerhart told Peter told Sly rather, "I'll give you the money, but it'll be a personal loan from me to you. And if I don't get it back, you don't graduate." And Peter gave Sly the wickedest smile. and that you could tell that maybe he was serious, but probably wasn't. But it was his sense of humor that shone through. And after I got that story from Sly, I called Peter. This was back in September, this past September. And we laughed and laughed about that story. He vaguely recalled it. But the most important thing, at least to me, was he didn't deny the story. He didn't deny that it happened. And I just thought that was just a wonderful example of his generosity, his care about students, his care about our enterprise while we were there. Just a wonderful example. When I came back, I learned that he and I shared a common love for August Wilson. August Wilson, most of you perhaps know, but if you don't, he's a storied playwright. He died in 2005, left himself a legacy of about 10 plays, all based in Pittsburgh and now known as the Pittsburgh Cycle. His plays, including like King Hedley, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Fences, The Piano Lessons, and others, chronicle a time in each decade of the 20th century and chronicle the Black life and the Black experience in Pittsburgh across the decades, and rings these universal themes throughout. So Peter and I have an email conversations back in back in August, when we are developing and launching this new course called Race, Law, and Society. And it's a 1-credit year-long course that we were doing and that we are doing, whereby faculty members could choose an artifact, choose a book by a storied author, choose a movie, choose a document like a transcript, or in Peter's case even, choose a play, and use that as a lens to look at racism and structural racism in society. And so we had this course all planned out, and Peter wanted to be a part of it, and he wrote me about his idea. And so I'm going to read to you this email that he wrote me. I'm going to read you a few emails. And he says to me, this was in mid-September: "As you know, I'm on sabbatical and have not been paying attention to law school emails. I thought that I could join the racial justice conversation in the spring semester and did not understand that we were starting this semester. I wanted to bounce an idea off you and get your reaction. I would be happy to lead a discussion group reading the plays of August Wilson and discussing them. I do not know whether that qualifies for this purpose, but the plays clearly present a Black perspective on white supremacy and the impact it has on community and person development. It also makes the ravages of Jim Crow clear, and it shows the Black perspective on law and the way law has been used by the white majority to maintain dominance. The play also shows the basic humanity of Blacks and Black culture in its good and not so good sides. In any event, reading and thinking about these plays is one of my sabbatical projects. So if this idea fits with some of your goals, and if you thought it would attract some students, I would be happy to start this conversation." And I write back to Peter enthusiastically: "What an inspired idea. Dude, I'd take your course. It's too late to start the course this semester, but perhaps you can propose it as a spring elective." Okay, so I write him back. So he writes back to Avi, Dean Cover, and I. He writes back a couple of days later: "Hi, Avi. Brian Adamson called my idea inspired, but perhaps he was just being nice." I am not sure, however, where my idea would fit. The idea is to form a clear class around reading and discussing the plays of August Wilson as a picture of the effects of marginalization and structural racism. There are legal themes in the plays and themes of unequal treatment that would justify me focusing on how the law could have been reformed to avoid the structural problems. And it was this way of thinking outside of the box, this creative way of thinking and looking at the law and looking at the law through new lenses that compelled or impelled his goal to create this whole class around August Wilson plays, which was so remarkable. And it speaks once again to the works that we know that he left, the works that Wendy just talked about, his tort law and social morality, his property law and social morality, his work, contract law and social morality, which looks at what our obligations are to one another from a moral standpoint, taking that theme through the lens of these doctrinal approaches, these doctrines of law, property, and torts. His publications works and his reasons for connecting with Wilson's work brought to my mind a quote from Wilson. And Wilson said years ago, "You can put law on paper, but that doesn't make it right." Peter left good works indeed. And I just want to thank you for the work you left me, Peter, that you left all of us. It has been said that as long as there's love and memory, there is no true loss. And I truly, in my marrow, believe that. And to the family, I wish you nothing but love, joy, peace, light, and strength. Thank you, Peter, and thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker is Paul Gianelli. He's a distinguished university professor and Weatherhead Professor Emeritus of Law.
I will remember Peter for his smile. He always had a smile when we would meet. He had what I call the happy gene, but it was more than a smile. If you had a problem, he would make time for you. He went out of a way to help Sue and I when we had problems and needed help in our family. I knew Peter first as a dean, then as a colleague, and finally as a good friend. When Peter was dean, I worked closely with him when I was the chair of the promotion and tenure committee. He was conscientious. He read everything. He also helped colleagues who were having problems or had writer's block. He assigned mentors to people in that situation. And it was a positive approach. Later, I served as chair of the appointments committee. Again, Peter was thorough and thoughtful. He recruited some of our best colleagues. When he stepped down as dean, I wondered how he would do. He was about 50 and didn't have time to write when he was dean. But he made the transition, producing groundbreaking scholarship that others have noted in this presentation. One of his main attributes as a dean and as a colleague was high standards. He was always consistent on this score. I saw him handle some very difficult situations as dean. He would not compromise on standards in these cases, but he explained his position with grace and calmness. He was a good friend. I will miss the smile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Scharf, the other co-dean, and it falls on me to bring our session to a close. This has been a really sad occasion, mixed with some positive glow of celebrating Peter Gerhart's incredible accomplishments and his legacy. I thank all of Peter's loved ones, friends, and former students who participated in today's session, including those of you who added your wonderful comments on chat. And my condolences go to Anne and Gracie and the rest of the Gerhart family. On a personal note, Peter was an invaluable mentor and advisor to Jessica and me, especially in our early years in our deanship. Perhaps the advice that he gave that I will remember and endeavor to follow most closely is not to let the tough times ever get you down. Well, with the continuing coronavirus and the death of such a beloved colleague, these have been really tough times. But Peter would want us to push on and to focus on the positive, such as the incredible legacy that he has left us. And he would want us to strive for continued improvement in all that we do. The SBA is collecting memories of Peter for a permanent online tribute. They have extended the deadline to submit your text or photos to April 30th. The web address for that is in the chat. And now let's roll the slideshow one more time as we sign off. Rest in peace, Peter. Thank you.